Hey guys, and welcome to today's episode of Give It the Beans. It is my absolute honour, and I think first time I am interviewing a female Olympian on the podcast is the one,
Yay.
only Rhea Gayle. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too shabby. I actually had on your sponsor 2 hours ago,
Awesome.
Mandy from Black Ice Bikinis.
Lovely.
When she was kind of we're going through the rigmarole of the episode, she mentioned yourself, and I was like, I have Rhea on the podcast in a couple hours, so she told me to mention you. But it's just an honor to speak to you. You're a huge motivation for a lot of females out there, and I know the ones that are listening have been very excited to hear this episode. But I'm fully aware there's maybe people that are new to the podcast that have maybe been living under a rock and don't know who you are. But what I'd love to do is just tell us about who you are, your journey within bodybuilding to where you are today. And what I'd love for you to do is don't be brief, be very descriptive of where it started.
Okay.
What was the moment that you thought, that's where I want to go down? Talk us through the years to today.
Okay. So I'm Rhea. I used to be a diver before I sort of got into all of this. And it was in 2016 where I was kind of having a bit of a struggle with my mental health. So I kind of had to take a back seat with diving, which was the end of my career, and sort of really start building myself back up again mentally. And at the time I was working at a Pure Gym down in Plymouth, and there was a girl that was there and she competed, and I was like, I've always kind of loved bodybuilding because my dad was a bodybuilder way back when. But I was kind of missing having the competitive edge and something to work towards that I would have in diving. So that's when I started sort of properly training. And then my friend was like, have you ever thought about actually jumping in and competing? And I was like, this could be a nice little challenge for myself, put no pressure on myself, and if I make it to the stage, I do. If I don't, I don't. And you can always, the goal for me was to just try and mentally work through something and prove to myself that I can still achieve something even with how I was feeling at the time. So way back when, I done the English Grand Prix with UK BFF as my first ever show. In my little green bikini. Everyone should know this story by now. My little green bikini, and as soon as I sort of got on stage, I absolutely loved it. And I get a lot of people that's asked me, like, what was the turning point for you to say, oh, you really love competing? And it was at my first show. Like, I had no idea what I was doing, but I just loved it. And ever since then, I've not really looked back. And then 2 years later, so in 2018 is when I got my pro card at the Amateur Olympia in Alicante. And then the year after that, I then done the pro circuit. So I done New York Pro, came third, Puerto Rico Pro came third, Toronto Pro came fourth. Then 3 weeks later, done Chicago, came fifth. And then I done the Norfolk Pro and came second. And with all of that, I accumulated enough points to then qualify for the 2019 Olympia, where I got second call-outs and came 13th. And that was absolutely mind-blowing. Like, I even remember it now, like hearing my name in the second call-out and being like absolutely surreal. And then that kind of runs into this season, working with JP and Corin. We done the Arnolds and I came 8th at the Arnolds in Ohio. I also qualified for the Arnolds Australia, but then Corona hit worldwide and that was cancelled, but I was out in Australia for 9 weeks. And then Alicante most recently, got my first ever pro win, which has been an absolute bucket list accomplishment. And now currently in Cancun, Mexico, 4.5 weeks out of the 2020 Olympia. So that's me.
I think anyone listening could probably know that you seem a very humble lady, and that's a huge list of accomplishments that you've rattled off like it was nothing. but I know it was nothing. I know it would have been hard. Now, for anyone out there that doesn't know much about competing, just talk us through how many sort of weeks of dieting, months of preparation you sort of rattled off within, let's say, the past year and a half, 2 years to prepare for those.
It's really hard to kind of put it into weeks because it kind of merges into the year.
Right.
So if I kind of go into last year, for example, that was 6 shows in a season, and that was like just keep going. And I think I started that prep in about February and was continuous until the Olympia, which was September. But obviously, after a show, you eat up again. And so you do have like little diet breaks in between, but it's more of I can't really put a finger on how many weeks, but competing is very much a lifestyle.
100%. And what it sounds like is that you came from that diving background, and it seems like you jumped in, threw yourself to a sport that, I'm not saying it replaced it, but you went in a different direction, and you strike me as someone that has a very relentless mindset of just getting better and better and better. Would you say that with every show you do, that hunger, that drive, just to become a better bodybuilder, does that become a little bit more each show?
Yeah, definitely. I think with every show, I think up until this point, it's kind of taken me these 2 weeks in Mexico to really kind of like sit down and really be like, right, Rhea, this is what you've actually done. This is what's led you to here now. And it's kind of, with each show I do personally, it helps me have a little bit more self-belief going into the next one. And really trying to improve on myself physically, like you said, to be the best bodybuilder I can be, but also mentally as well. That for me is important as well.
And that's maybe one that is often overlooked in the sport. And maybe I think it's talked about a lot more over the past couple of years, but I guess the old school method was, you're a bodybuilder, you're hard as nails, and nothing really affects you. Do you want to sort of talk us through what bodybuilding has done for your own mental health? I think that would be really valuable for some of the listeners that are just getting started.
Yeah, this probably sounds very like cliche, and some people might be like, oh, but prep's really hard. How can you kind of think that way? But it's kind of saved me in terms of with how I am, I'm very much a creature of habit. And for example, diving, I knew exactly what I was doing, exactly what time. I'd have my set days that I'd be training, and it would just be week by week would be routine. And I kind of struggle without that. I know how to relax. I know how to sort of have my downtime, but I struggle with structure. And I feel like bodybuilding for me has given me more structure and routine, and it's kind of flowed into normal life as well. So more routine with coaching clients and posing clients, and how I can bring my dedication to bodybuilding into something else as well. So I feel like it's really helping me grow as a person, and just instilling bits of confidence in me to then put into other aspects of my life.
So I suppose you could say that, bodybuilding may have perhaps changed you as a person, whether, for the better. If there's someone out there that's sitting on the fence about starting bodybuilding, or whether they should be serious, if you were chatting to them right now, if I was perhaps a female, had long hair, etc., what would you say to me? If I was kind of having doubts about should I, shouldn't I, drawbacks, if you were to just convince those ladies out there, what would you say?
So firstly, I would say make sure you're kind of in it for the right reasons. Because it, like I said, prep is very hard. I know that sometimes it can be glamorized a lot on, I don't even know if that's really a word, guys. It can be glamorized on social media. And I know that some people kind of get into it for social media. Not everybody, but it happens. And then there's sort of the after the show. I'm not, this is me, with what I'm saying, it kind of sounds like I'm not selling it, but I would just say that there is more that comes after, especially after a show, and just making sure that you've got the right coach and building up a support network as well would be very, very important. But I always say to people, do it. Do it, do it, do it. Absolutely, absolutely love it. I'm the worst. I'm like, guys, you want to quit? Do it. Do it, do it, do it, do it. Because it is. Some people will like it, some people won't, but I always say I feel it's such reward just getting up on stage and knowing that you've made it through the 12, 14, 16, 20, 24 weeks or however long it's been. And, you know, I always say it's always about the journey. Whatever happens on stage is always a bonus. You've got to remember that there's a journey to the stage.
You're absolutely right. And I think that when you talk about the improvements to mental health, and that word of accomplishment of what you've done within a sometimes 12, sometimes 24 week,
Mm-hmm.
it certainly makes someone feel very empowered and
Mm-hmm.
have a sense of self-pride that I think very few people in the world, unless you're a bodybuilder, can really relate to.
Mm-hmm.
So before I go off on a tangent like I always do, what I want to say is, you mentioned a story about a little green bikini and that everyone knows it. I know there's some listeners that don't know the story.
Oh.
Could you talk us through that story? Because I'm intrigued as well, and I know that I'd love to hear that from where you were back then to now being an Olympian, a returning Olympian. It would be awesome to hear that difference.
Yeah, so it was kind of like way back then. I kind of didn't have any idea what I was getting myself into. In terms of, like, obviously now as the sport has become, well, thankfully with sort of social media, you're able to sort of understand more. You've got companies like Black Ice, you know, that is lifesaver. So let's talk about my little green bikini. So I think my bikini was like £40. It had about 10 rhinestones on it. Didn't really fit me properly. I was just like, oh my God, I really just love this colour, and blah, blah, blah. So I always bring back to my first ever stage photo, which was in 2016 in my green bikini. And then in 2017, that's when I started working with Mandy and not looked back since. So it's like, for me, I always refer to that as the process. Everyone's got to start somewhere. And that's always like my green bikini story. Like, I had big frizzy hair, a neon green bikini. My tan was just non-existent. But you know, that's where I started. And I always look back and be like, guys, that was me. You know, you've always got to look back and see how far you've come and the support network that you've had. So yeah,
absolutely right. And I feel that with a lot of the newbies that come on board with myself, that they'll go through like 6 months and then they always they get a bit down in the dumps because they feel like they're so far away from their goal. And
yeah.
I always bring up their first check-in photo. And what you sort of just described is a similar process and I'm sure as a pro athlete, you'll still have those moments. Well, maybe I should ask you, if you still have those moments of self-doubt and like, oh, I've not really changed.
Yes.
And
yes.
Deal with it.
So up until I can tell you now that it's such a natural thing, especially in bodybuilding. It's such a natural thing to have self-doubt. And most recently, that's why I keep coming up with the caption, no more fear, no more doubt, because whenever you think you can't, there is someone else that thinks they can and they're already ahead of you. So you've kind of really got to, you know, just take everything in your stride and be like, look, this is this. I'm saying this now. A couple of days ago, I checked in and I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be ready. But then you have to just take that moment, acknowledge it, and then carry on pushing. It's a natural process.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm so happy you said that, because I'm sure there's a lot of females out there that are just like, yeah, but Rhea, she's hardcore, she doesn't think like that. But what you just sort of admitted is that, you know what, just talk about natural, don't let it put you off. And that's absolutely amazing. Now, if we can get back to the Olympia stage, subject of sort of qualifying for that, could you talk us through, we know that within bodybuilding that over the years we can train a bit differently, we can
Mm-hmm.
do a bit differently. If you think back to the green bikini
Mm-hmm.
to now, how has your training perhaps changed, or your, let's say, routine? Because you mentioned routine, structure, sleep.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you talk us through, have things placed a bit of a better importance? Have you started training a bit differently? How's it all been?
yeah. So I think for me, it's been a massive mindset shift. And it's continually, even if we sort of bring it back to when you said, like, with each show, you try to focus on getting better and better. And I think that is the mindset of, it's all about progression. So going back to everyone starts somewhere, you learn different methods, and you just start progressing and leveling up. And I think that has been my main mindset, and having the thought process of, wanting to get better with each show, and now setting even bigger goals for myself then requires the progression mentally and physically to sort of get there. So I think season upon season, show upon show, it's all about that progression.
Yeah. And would you say that from every show that you done, did you then come away and think, right, I'm going to keep my training the same, or what did you get different feedback about what you perhaps needed to bring up to then get into the pro ranks? Because I think there's a lot of beginners out there that they're not really sure what the pro ranks are, and the different, the massive difference between amateur and pro. So could you talk us through that sort of feedback, or that mindset of how that sort of changed between amateurs, how you improved to get that pro rank?
Yeah, so with my physique, it's definitely sort of still a work in progress. And my feedback sort of since joining the Pro League back in 2018, adding some more size, and then upper body was there, and then it was okay, bringing up the legs. So a lot of my training, especially most recently, is progressive overload. And even now we've changed my training to more of a back and bis, legs, delt and arms, chest delts and tries. So leading into the Olympia, my training has changed to be even more specific. But I would always say, whether you're an amateur or a pro, after your shows, always ask for feedback, because there's always an area that can be worked on, and then your coach can really sort of hone in and tailor that to then make the improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, again, if we look at the beginner out there that's maybe they've been to one or two shows, and I think at times with Instagram we often follow the big names like yourself and say, like, oh, they've turned pro and they've turned pro, and it could maybe seem on Instagram that it looks easy, but when in reality it's certainly not. Could you talk us through the jump up as an athlete, what it felt like, or if it felt the same, to go from those sort of amateur ranks to pro?
Most definitely.
How did it feel?
Most definitely. So you have to, anyone that's sort of on the cusp of getting their pro card has to understand that you go from being the best amateur to a rookie pro. And then you sort of start again, and you have to sort of be mentally prepared for that a lot of pros are in the pro ranks for years and years and years until they get to the Olympia, until they get to the Arnolds, until they get their first pro win, and I think sometimes, again, on Instagram, it is just a looking glass it's a success highlight reel. But it does take a lot mentally and physically, but also just to remember that there is that you do have the odd pros that do turn pro, they do one show, boom, they're at the Olympia. Like, some people are just mind-blowingly incredible, but other times it is, you've really sort of got to start that work again. And that's the fun of bodybuilding. It's all about progress. It's all about getting better and chasing your goals, and yeah.
And I think what you said is so right, that it is glamorized on Instagram because it is the highlight reel. But I think that anyone that has been in the bodybuilding game, the bodybuilding scene for a long time, that appreciates what a prep's like, what it's like to be improvements, can look at your journey and just be massively inspired, and just be like, holy fucking shit, because it's just it's relentless pursuit to be better. But if we go back to the bottom of the chain and we think about, say, the beginner out there listening, the amateur, that they have dreams like yourself, and they look at you as I want to achieve a similar sort of journey, but they're just getting started. I know that some of them might even not know what the criteria of perhaps figure is. So what we thought you could do is, those listeners that don't really know what figure is, maybe perhaps talk us through about what they look for, but also just what I would add to that is, we know that IFBB is the prestigious one, the one that everyone wants to do. It takes us to the big stage in the world. But where should a beginner start, do you feel? Should it be within a few feds? So I guess that was two questions in one. I don't mean to confuse you.
I can merge them together.
Let's do that.
So I would always say, never be discouraged by, okay, IFBB is the road to the Olympia. Maybe like, oh, that's too big to dream of. I'll start with a different federation. You've got Two Bros, which has beginners classes. It's got regional shows. It's got British finals. So it has a class that fits everybody. So if your goal is to one day turn pro and go to the Olympia, or some people just, they just want to compete and have fun and gain experience, you can still do that through the NPC and IFBB. And I think a lot of people sort of get intimidated at the thought of like, I'm not good enough for that. But you never know unless you try. And like I said, Two Bros has regional shows. It has British. It has so many shows on for people that are beginners, intermediates, masters, open classes. So it's so sort of with figure, they're sort of looking at the shape. So they're looking at a lovely taper, so nice wide back and lats, capped shoulders, small waist, quad development, hamstring development, and just creating a really nice sort of X shape. But again, I know a lot of people will look at the top 3 Olympians and be like, oh, I'm not genetically built that way, but you can always train in a way that helps your own physique. So if you think, oh, my waist isn't that small, then you can work on bringing up your back. Same with your legs. I think the thing with bodybuilding and categories, it's all about illusions. Posing is all about illusions.
Yeah, you're 100% right. For beginners, I know I've done episodes on just posing itself. I know that as you move up the ranks, there's even a bigger emphasis on that. And
100%.
Could it be that points are won and lost through posing? You think in presentation in those rounds, versus less so in an amateur? Would that be right in saying?
Even in an amateur show. So my biggest advice to someone that is either just starting or coming up to their first show or a seasoned competitor, as you would with your cardio, your training, your food, posing needs to be up there as a priority as well, because you could have the best physique, not know how to display it, and that can literally, if it's very, very close, if say top 3 are very, very close and the other 2 have really gracious posing and you're a little bit of it, the judges will then be drawn to the other 2. So stage presence, stage presentation is very, very important when it comes to competing at any level, amateur, pro, any level. And
would you say, if you could think back to the green bikini, how's your posing come on in your stage?
Oh my goodness.
Is there any differences?
Oh goodness, I literally moved like a robot. Like, Yeah, I even now, like, I practice posing after my sessions, and pretty much every day, just really working on like the flow of my posing. And if I look at myself 4 years ago, just wow, simply wow. But again, it's all about the journey, and it's one of those what I wish I knew when I started was how important posing and stage presentation is.
Yeah.
And I think for me that is something that I've learned along the way, and something that I look at other competitors and I'm like, oh wow, they move like this, and it is all sort of an art as well.
Yeah, and I think that in the amateur ranks, in the beginner ranks, it can often be overlooked because we get so focused on
Yes.
condition, or my abs through, or my glutes in, and I'm like,
Yeah.
how often you practicing posing? And they go, I did a
Just do
little.
my check-ins.
Yeah, right. So I guess the piece of advice I want to ask you is, for the girl there that is thinking about competing next year, what would you suggest, or how often would you pose? If you could go back to the green bikini days, how often
Mm-hmm.
would you pose compared to what you do now?
A hell of a lot. A hell of a lot. So I would definitely work with a posing coach way back when. Um, and I would sort of definitely prioritize my posing more, because I used to be like, oh my god, have I got abs yet? Oh my god, da, 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 da. So it was one of those where it wasn't really high on my list. I would do it, but it wouldn't be as often as I would now. So my advice to a beginner would be practice often, because by that time, when you're on stage, a lot of people first time competing, they're very, very nervous, very nervous, and this can come through on stage. And that also comes through of, oh, you're putting so much pressure on yourself of, I want to do this, I want to win, I want to do well, da, 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 that all of that comes to one when you're on stage.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can knock out your posing and not be nervous about your posing, everything else looks so much more relaxed. You're able to display your physique I can't even speak. A lot better, because you've practiced, you're comfortable, you're confident.
And if in that moment next year, the first time competitor, they've been nailing the posing, they've been practicing, but they're at the side of the stage and they're still shitting themselves, their legs are shaking. If Rhea was in their ear for the 10, 15 seconds, 30 seconds before stage, what would you be saying?
I would honestly say, you've worked for this. You've got a total of 5 minutes up on that stage to display all of those weeks' work. If you're nervous, go up there. You almost have to. I was talking to Phoebe Hagen about this, and it's like you have to kind of. It's an act. When you're on stage, it's an act. In terms of, you have to switch off everything else, and you can't communicate with the judges in a verbal way that this is me as a person. You can only do it by body language.
Yeah.
And you have your goal set for that show. So how are you going to communicate that with the judges? You're going to do it through your posing.
Yeah. Would you also say that they need to go up there and give it the beans?
Yeah. And first and foremost, I'd say go and enjoy yourself. If you're doing a show for the first time, don't put pressure on yourself to be like, I've got to win this, I've got to do this. Just think, whatever happens now is a bonus. You've made it to the stage, whatever happens now is a bonus. That is my mindset, honestly, every time I go into a show.
Yeah, I love that. And would you say that the more you practice your posing over the years, how much did that help you with that sort of mind to muscle connection in the gym?
A lot.
And I was going to say, and with that, do you feel that it's helped you add the tissue you've got today through practicing your posing?
I wouldn't say through posing. I would say sort of exercise selection with training. But sort of when I am training things like when I'm doing a lat pull down, I'll sort of think, okay, when I'm opening up for a front pose, I kind of get the same feeling. After I've done a set, I'll sort of hit a front pose to make sure I'm feeling everything correctly. But in terms of sort of the tissue that I've added, that would definitely be sort of training and exercise selection. But I would always like post training, practice your posing.
Yeah.
First thing in the morning, post training.
Is that what you do literally every day, morning?
Morning, so I'll sort of do it after my cardio, or like once I've done my check-in, which is pretty much every other day, and it will soon go to dailies. I'll then put aside another 15 minutes, go through my routine, go through my quarter turns, and then after training, not after legs. In there, got hamstring cramp, never again.
On the Latin podcast I done with Mandy, I've trained legs today, and I was sitting down for the hour before the podcast, and then halfway through hours, I literally went like this because my left hamstring.
Yeah, hamstring cramp is. But yeah, normally after, especially coming closer into a show like I am now for the Olympia, everything is just more and more and more and more.
Superb. Now, I'll know, and a lot of bodybuilders will know, that the biggest stage, the biggest goal is to get up in the Olympia and win. And I'm sure you have that as your goal. Tell us, have you got a specific time frame you're working towards? Is that how you work? Okay, right, this show I'm going to aim for that placing, that show this placing, or it's just a case of I'm going to be the best bodybuilder I can be?
I can honestly sit before you right now, and I never sort of go into a show being like, I want this placing, because for me, I end up putting too much pressure on myself. I always want to make sure that I'm improving, taking on the judges' feedback and improving into a show. So a lot of people say like, oh, what's your goal for the Olympia this time round? I'd love to improve my placing, but so does everybody else that is getting on that stage. So as long as I can be the best Rhea that I can be getting on that stage, literally anything that happens there on out is a bonus.
Yeah, and I suppose, do you feel, we mentioned about Instagram and sort of glamorizing the stage and whatnot. Do you feel that a lot of first-time competitors will kind of get in their head about placings and maybe not achieve that and then put down their own self-worth?
Yes, yeah. I always try to say, try not to fixate too much on placings. Try to remember the journey that you've been on to the stage.
Yeah.
Try and, if you enjoy the journey and enjoy the process, placings are just icing on the cake.
You're right.
And obviously the better that you are becoming as a bodybuilder, the more of those top placings that you're going to be getting. But if you're enjoying the process, and if there wasn't a stage, I'd still be doing the same thing. I'd be eating, I'd be training, I'd be posing, I'd be checking in. Like it is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
So that's why I always say whatever happens on that stage is a bonus.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's coming from right now the top female athlete in the UK, and if not one of the top in the world. And the reason I say that is that I think back to my beginner days, and I obsessed over, like, you know, for a year, like I'm going to win. You know, I'm doing this for the win, and then on the day I was probably the biggest guy there, looked out of place in men's physique and didn't place because of it. I felt like my world was tumbling down. And I felt lost after it. Do you see a lot of, whether it's guys or girls, do you see a lot of that straight away? And if you do, you know, is there anything else you would say on top of what you've already said?
Yeah, so it is very easy to feel a lost feeling after a show, whether you get the placing you want or you don't. But I would always remember, especially if you don't get the placing that you hoped for, is that bodybuilding is such a subjective sport. You're judged on how you look and how you look next to other people. And you've kind of got to, once you sort of get your head around that anything can happen on the day, it kind of relinquishes the pressure. But also with the lost feeling, for whether you've got your placing or you haven't, and sort of what's next. I always try to set up little goals post-show.
Okay.
To try and keep you moving forward, mini goals, because it is very easy. You put all of your focus into that show, that once it's done, it's like, oh, what next? And it's easy to kind of get into a sort of mentally downward spiral. So setting yourself little goals post-show.
What would an example of your goals be? Whether it's for yourself or whether it's for a complete beginner. In fact, I'd love to know both.
Oh, what have my little goals been? I've kind of like, I set some up for post Alicante anyway. But it was like, for me, it was like going on more walks, listening to more podcasts. It can be like little things, or working on your business, more family time, or, you know, drinking X amount of water, and, you know, saving. I know that a lot of people become very food focused post show, so having little process goals that will help your overall progress. So it can literally be anything, like anything.
It's good because, I mean, I don't know if you see it, but like competitors they do one show, they maybe have been so focused on placing, and they just totally fuck off bodybuilding. And I feel so disheartened for them in that, because they maybe have 6 months of not training, not doing this, eating what they want, and they go, oh my God, what have I done? So giving them that advice will be something that I know will be hugely invaluable for them.
Yeah.
One thing I think I should have said at the start of the podcast, I'm sure people have realised this already, is that you've achieved what you've achieved, and it's not been the best year for bodybuilding, with a lot of shows being cancelled. And how was that for you? Could you talk us through how you sort of dealt with that? I know that the pro shows have been going ahead and lots of amateurs, but, you know, talk us through, were you prepping for a show? Did it get cancelled? How many weeks out were you? And just mentally, how did you cope with it all?
Okay, so if I sort of recap the season, I was actually like 3 days out of the Arnold's Ohio in March. So I was there in Ohio. I was in my Airbnb before going to the host hotel, and there was loads of speculation of like shows being cancelled, and I was like, what's going on? This was very, very new, when like COVID was kind of a new thing. And it was at that moment, but at that Arnold's, I was like, this year is going to be very, very different. So I remember prejudging, walking out, there was no audience was allowed. You could just hear camera clicking, and you were just in front of the judges. And then 2 weeks later, I was due to compete at the Arnold's Australia. So I remember I was back in the UK for about 4 days, and then flew to Australia, arrived to Australia on the Saturday, and then the Sunday, the Arnold's was cancelled. I was 5 days out.
Shit.
And then the world was on lockdown, so I was stuck in Australia for 9 weeks. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't tough. I felt very lost. I felt lost as an athlete. But then I remembered that everyone's in the same situation, so it kind of brought me, like, everyone's home training. Everyone, you know, it's very new to everybody. So I was in Australia for 9 weeks, and then luckily when I came back, and the UK was still in lockdown, but I had somewhere that I could train. We kind of came up with an action plan of, right, let's just do a restart of everything and see what happens. We were like, at that time, there were still shows that were meant to be on in August, but obviously they got cancelled. So it was like, we'll just see what happens, see where my body gets to, see how it responds to things. And then I got back in May, and then it was June, it was actually my birthday, that we're like, there's shows in October, let's see what happens. We've got 15 weeks. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like I said, if there was no stage, I'd still be doing the same thing. And if I got to a week out and it was cancelled, I'm in a better place to then reverse and start growing again. So it's all a process. And there was a lot of speculation because Spain had been in lockdowns and stuff like that. And I was like, a lot of people were like, oh, Rhea, are you going to compete this year after everything that's going on? Like, shows might be cancelled. And I said, but yes, on one hand, it's been a very hit and miss year, but also, what if it turns out to be something amazing?
Yeah.
Like, so I kind of mentally flipped it on its head and was like, yes, 2020 has thrown so much at the world, but I was like, this is what I love to do, and I'm just gonna give it a try and put everything I can into this. And here we are, sat in Mexico, getting ready to go to the 2020 Olympia. So it's kind of, for me, like, really brought up 2020. And yeah,
I think everything you do with the grit and determination of just who you are as an individual, because it does take a certain character to face that sort of adversity and just go, fuck it, yeah, let's do it. Right? But, you know, your background, everything that you said on the podcast, it's not surprising for you to say, yeah, well, we just went for it as well. And obviously, you know, your coaching team are fairly hardcore as well, and I'm sure they would be a massive motivation for you.
Yeah, daily. Now,
if you could give any advice out there on top of it, I mean, you've said so much, and I'm so thankful for that. But to anyone out there listening, that England's currently in lockdown at the moment, Scotland, by the time this podcast goes out, they maybe are just getting out, or who knows what will happen, right? But they've been annoyed this year because their shows have been cancelled. They're maybe thinking next year, you know what? What's the fucking point? If you were to sit and have a chat with them, and you can be firm, what would you say? I know that you said at the start of the podcast, just do it. But some people might not resonate with that. But what would you say?
What's your why? What is your why?
I like that. For someone out there that doesn't know what that means, could you elaborate?
So when I sort of say, what is your why? Like, why do you want to do this? What is your sort of passion and purpose for this? If it is, again, to the people that are like, oh, you know what, I might just sack off next year and go for 2022, that is also okay, because bodybuilding for them might not be at the forefront. But if it's someone that's sort of really like, oh, worried about external circumstances, one, what is your why? So what does bodybuilding mean to you? What do you want out of this? And two, don't stress about things that you can't control. Only focus on what you can control. And I feel like the prep that I had for Alicante was one of the best I've ever had. And also out here in Mexico as well. Like, the past 2 weeks has been the best I've ever had, because there's been no distractions.
Yeah.
So and I've spoken to a few people that have been like, prep's been like really, really different this year. Like, what has it been? And I said, think about it. We've kind of been in a lockdown. We got out of the lockdown, gyms have opened, and it's kind of that gratitude towards, we don't know when that's going to get taken away again. Yeah. So I feel like everybody is really like leveled up, and I love seeing it. So I feel like going into next year, if there's someone that wants to compete, even though I say go for it, what's your why?
I love that. Now, one thing I like to ask all the guests before I let them go, this does not have to relate to bodybuilding, it can relate to anything that you've went through in life, but could you give us, or could you share with us, just something that has been your biggest lesson that you've ever learned in life, and from that, is there any advice you would give to others?
The biggest lesson I've learned in life is that growth definitely takes place outside of your comfort zone. And don't be afraid to explore outside of your comfort zone, especially how uncomfortable it can be. Because this past year, my whole life has like changed, and I went through a bit of a downtime. And at that time, I was like, oh, is this going to get any better? And then a year later, here we are. So just it's growth. 100% growth happens outside of the comfort zone, and don't be afraid to explore out of there and spend a good amount of time outside of there.
Yeah, 100%. It's no fun in the comfort zone, is it?
No.
That's what I say. Now,
So as it can be, you can feel very stuck in there. So venture outside of there. Any ideas that you have and things you want to do, things you want to achieve, do it.
love that. Now, for someone out there listening that maybe they don't follow you right now, maybe they want to get in touch with you, maybe they want to send you an email or that, could you explain to listeners just how they could do that, how they can get in contact with you?
So you can drop me a DM on Instagram if you have like any questions about anything at all. It's Rhea GPT. Or if you want to email me about coaching or posing, or again, any questions at all, it's RheaGayleCoaching@hotmail.com.
Superb. I guess I should say a massive thank you from myself and the listeners out there. And to really all, I think that the UK bodybuilding scene, you really are leading the way. And it is a true honour to get a chance to just chat about your journey, talk shop. It is truly inspiring. I know that there'll be many listeners out there that'll get the same buzz. So a massive thank you for that.
Thank you.
Not a problem, but I'm sure that I speak for all the listeners that we wish you well for the Olympia. And then when you're up there, make sure that you give it the beans.